Welcome to Sports Map Houston. I'm Brandon Strange. Once again, I'm joined by the editor of SportsMapHouston.com and the host of Moneyline on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5, Josh Jordan. Josh, thanks again for joining me. We believe next week we'll be back to our normal recording schedule and rotation of contributors. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel so you can get notifications every time new episodes drop. Josh, over the past week, we've started to hear rumblings in the media about Carolina having interest in trading for Deshaun Watson. The crux of the rumblings involved Christian McCaffrey, which, to be clear, that's not based in reality. That's just, media rumblings. The Panthers are interested in Deshaun per reports, and the Texans continue to not engage in trade talks involving Watson. Jason La Canfora has reported that the Panthers ownership is interested in upgrading the quarterback position and were reportedly interested in trading for Stafford before he was dealt to the Rams. So let's put Carolina aside as a trade partner. Josh, is a two-part question. Number one, do you think the Texans are making the right play strategically by not engaging in negotiations? And two, are the Texans really not interested in trading Deshaun, or is this, as A.J. Hoffman suggested, a play to drive up the price?
I think it's going to be the ultimate game of chicken here. It's a tricky deal for the Texans, but if they want any chance of holding on to Deshaun, they're going to have to wait all the way until training camp and see if he shows up. That's the way they can possibly keep him. They must think that eventually when games start happening that he'll want to play. And we did see at the end of this season, there were a lot of people saying, hey, Deshaun should sit out these last few games because they're meaningless. And, the Texans can't make the playoffs and you don't want to get Deshaun hurt. And remember, he was adamant that he was going to play those games no matter what. So I'm wondering if the Texans are betting on that the ultimate competitor in Deshaun will come out and he will show up and play these games and he won't miss out on the money. And with James Harden, we thought that he was going to be traded before the season, and that didn't end up happening. He ended up showing up and playing a few games, and they eventually got the deal done. So you wonder if Deshaun was kind of watching that situation and knowing that eventually he'll have to show up. But what's interesting is he has to participate in 85% or more of off-season activities for a $500,000 bonus. So if he misses all of minicamp and training camp and misses out on that money, I think that'll tell us a lot. But to your second question, I think a lot of the Texans' angle on this is, like, what do they think about the quarterbacks in this draft? Do they really like one of these guys? And if they do, then maybe they do decide to pull the trigger and trade Deshaun. But I think right now Cal McNair does not want to lose his quarterback, and they're going to hold tight until forced to do otherwise.
Yeah, and you mentioned Deshaun sitting out, and obviously that is one of the bigger questions looming over this is Deshaun willing to sit? And there are a couple of different really important upcoming events that loom over this situation. The first being the NFL draft, which starts on April 29th. The second is the start of training camp in late July, at which point we'll have a better idea of how dug in Deshaun Watson is. But my question is this: how much leverage could the Texans lose by the time Deshaun is able to play his first card by sitting out?
A lot. If they don't trade him before the draft, that's going to be a problem if they're going to end up trading him, because all the other teams are going to have their quarterbacks in place. And if you're trading him for draft picks, those draft picks won't help you this year because the draft will have already passed you by. So that would be for the next year. I almost think if I'm the Texans and we don't trade Deshaun and we get past the NFL draft and training camp comes around and he's not there, I think you just hold tight. I mean, he's a very valuable asset. And if you have to wait and trade him in the offseason, if he really does sit out all those games, then that is something they could do. Or they could trade him in season. We saw that with James Harden. I know it's the NBA, but these are franchise players. There's still going to be a market for these guys. Like I said, it's going to get really interesting when the NFL draft passes by, because that changes things. And what concerns me with training camp is remember the Brett Favre watch with Ed Werder back in the day when Brett Favre, how many days of training camp Brett Favre hasn't showed up? Is he going to retire? Is he going to play? It's going to become a even bigger story. It's already a big story, but a huge story when, if Ed Werder's camped out at Texans training camp every day giving reports about Deshaun not being there, all the players and coaches having to answer questions about Deshaun. It's going to be must-see TV, I'll tell you that.
Well, you mentioned Harden, and Harden was kind of playing hardball with the Rockets, and his way out was to make it uncomfortable, right? Like, he vocalized the thing that we had been hearing, but we hadn't really heard it out loud. And once he vocalized it, that deal got done. Granted, again, different situation, contracts are in different situation. But the other thing I was thinking about while you were talking, we can say all day what Deshaun Watson's worth and what his value is. But as we know, economics 101 is an asset is only as valuable as someone's willing to pay for it. And if the Texans do, go past the draft, that means there'll be less people with draft equity to deal, as you said, for this year, to where you can make an immediate impact or improvement on your team. And the second thing is there's already trades that have happened already, and quarterbacks have already been moved this offseason. So there's, at least two less teams that are now in the mix because they've already made big moves. So you've narrowed down your list of suitors because you were slower to act. And again, maybe it's because they really have no intention to act. But what's going to be interesting is if they do eventually act and then end up getting less because there are less suitors. So I want to ask you this, in that scenario, what's more likely to happen? Deshaun Watson shows up and plays, Deshaun Watson sits out and is not traded, or the Texans make a deal but don't get proper value because they waited too long?
I think if the Texans deal him, it's very possible it won't be the proper value. We've seen so many missteps, with that front office over the last few years. I think it's more likely that he ends up playing if they don't trade him. And the reason why is, there's no risk. If he just doesn't show up and they trade him, he gets what he wants, right? Like, that works out great. And by show up, I mean before real games start being played. If he can force their hand with them knowing the draft is a big deal and a big deadline. So by him not showing up, if he can make them make a decision and move him, he gets what he wants. And then if they don't trade him, then it was worth a shot. And you're stuck right back where you are right now. And I think the competitor in him he's going to want to play football games. Giving back the signing bonus, I don't think that's something he's going to want to do. So I think the Texans are just betting on that Deshaun's rolling the dice. And if it works out, great. And if it doesn't, he's stuck right where he was in the beginning here in Houston.
The cards are so stacked in the Texans' favor because of the contract that Deshaun signed. So I do think that is the more likely scenario, that he seems like a guy who's going to be protective of his reputation. He's not going to want to be known as a quitter. So I do see him playing. But I think we should never rule out the Texans' ability to bungle a trade, because we have seen them trade. And again, this was under Bill O'Brien, so maybe different, but we have seen them trade star players and get less value back in the name of culture. So if Deshaun Watson starts acting out, and by acting out, I mean maybe makes negative statements about the team or negative statements about his situation, if he puts enough pressure on them in the name of culture, I could definitely see them taking less than value for him.
I completely agree with that. I just, Deshaun's been reluctant to even, say bad things about Jack Easter. And that's what it's ultimately going to take for them to trade him, in my opinion, is he is going to have to say something about ownership or Jack Easterby or his teammates, like you said. And that doesn't seem like Deshaun. So until he does something like that, I think he's going to be a Houston Texan.